Good morning. Welcome to the second day of the Taiwan Internet Governance Forum 2022. This forum is jointly organized by TWIGF and the Taiwan Network Information Center, TWNIC, with the support of the Ministry of Digital Affairs and the National Communications Commission, NCC. Today's first panel discussion is given by Microsoft. It will discuss lessons learned in critical infrastructure cybersecurity following the Ukraine war. This is a hybrid panel. On stage, we have our moderator, Mr. Vincent Shi. He is Assistant General Counsel in Microsoft Taiwan, together with Mr. Kenny Huang, Board Member and CEO of TWNIC. And joining us online are Ms. Cristin Goodwin. She is Associate General Counsel in Microsoft in the United States. Professor Kyungho Lee from the School of Cybersecurity in Korea University. And Mr. Koichiro Komiyama, Director of JPCERT. Can everybody hear us? Yes, we are missing one person. Here, okay. So everybody's here, and I give the stage to Mr. Shi.
Thank you. Good morning. Our friends here in Taipei and our friends online, and welcome to day 2 of TWIGF and our panel number 5. It's a very interesting, exciting topic. We are going to discuss the critical infrastructure cybersecurity after Ukraine war. And before we dive into the great speech and all the sharing, just also want to share with you how we start, how Microsoft we start with the preparation for this section. It's quite interesting that all begin with a lunch gathering with our college in Korea and Japan during our Asia regional meetings. We discussed a lot of opportunity and of course challenges in our region, and Ukraine war, of course, will be one of the key topics. And we found out that there are two special situations. And of course, Ukraine war, everybody knows, is totally changed the world. And also a good living example of the so-called hybrid war. It's a combination of physical and also the internet and cybersecurity war together. And also we found out during the whole process, actually the critical infrastructure has been the key target for all the cyber attack. And also another highlight we found out will also trigger us to organize today's session is it's not just targeted at Ukraine. Actually, all the cyber attack is also targeted all the neighboring countries and focus on all the regions. So it's not just a single battle or it's a single country's issue. Actually, the cyber attack, we all know, is cross borders. And right now, after the Ukraine war, we can see this cross borders is even more obvious. So it's great that we have Japan, Korea experts here. They are all recommended by our college in Microsoft Korea and Japan. And we are also glad that my college in Korea and Japan, they are also joined online. Especially we have our expert, Cristin. I will introduce her later. So today's agenda, today's flow is we will let Cristin, just as you know that Cristin is actually, I believe all of you probably already heard, we have a special Ukraine report, and the report is actually Cristin is the behind the scene, leading the team to prepare the report. So we will it's our honor to invite Cristin to share 20 minutes about the current status and any special update after the Ukraine report. And then we will follow by the 3 experts. The first one will be our good friends, Kenny here, and to introduce 10 minutes to share the status in Taiwan. And then we'll have Korea, Professor Lee will share his observation from Korea. And then we have Spark from Japan. So it's really a great opportunity, really a cross-border collaborations. And we're really excited and look forward to a very fruitful discussion for this morning's discussion. So without any further ado, let me quickly introduce Cristin. Cristin is our General Manager and Associate General Counsel for Microsoft, and CELA is called Corporate External Legal Affairs. And as I mentioned, Cristin leads our Microsoft Digital Security Unit called DSU. This team is dedicated focusing on combating nation-state actors and advanced attacks worldwide. And DSU also provide insight into nation-state and advanced cyber actor behavior, their impact on victims, and share those insights with our customer, government, and the world. So for the next 20 minutes, I will introduce Cristin, and let Cristin introduce our Ukraine special report and share the first-hand sharing from this report and the most updated observation. So the floor is yours, Cristin.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the warm welcome, and I wish that I could be with you in person on your Wednesday morning, my Tuesday evening. I'm here live in Microsoft's headquarters in Redmond, Washington, in the United States, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to be with you today. As Vincent notes, the team that I run has created the Microsoft Special Report on Ukraine, and I'll share some of the detail about that report and some of the lessons that we have learned from our work and our study in Ukraine. I've been with Microsoft for over 16 years, the duration of that time in cybersecurity and nation-state security, and so when we bring the team together, we spent a long time studying the evolution of attacks and how nation states behave. What was a fascinating thing to us as we watched the beginning of the Ukraine conflict unfold is that the first shots of the war took place online. The beginning of the war was virtual. When we watched in January early attacks that began using wiper or destructive malware aimed at key critical infrastructure and government targets in Ukraine, we knew that we were in a different situation. As we've dealt with in the past with historical cyber attacks, destructive attacks like the ones that we saw in Ukraine had historically been the domain of terrorists or nation-state attackers. Now we're shocked to see that destructive attack activity is happening in real time, and it is something that is impacting Ukrainian critical infrastructure and government agencies throughout the conflict zone. When we started responding to the government of Ukraine, we were sharing information with them about the attack activity that we saw. We were providing them insights to help mitigate the threats and risks that they were facing. And we were collaborating with them on potential responses. We thought it was important to share with the world what we had been seeing when we released our special report in April of 2022, because what really surprised us is that Microsoft was spending a lot of time working with the Ukrainian government and seeing extremely advanced attack activity coming from a range of Russian actors. But the world media was questioning, where's the A-team? Where are the cyber attacks? Why are we not seeing broad amounts of cyber activity? And we knew that the Ukrainian government were dealing with extremely difficult and capable attacks. So we decided that it was important to make the detail public, and we released a significant amount of information at the end of April. One of the things that was fascinating to us as we started to unpack the cyber activity that we saw was that there was a combination of cyber operations and physical operations, and that cyber operations tended to come first. So when we looked at the different cyber attacks that were happening, and this is shared in the report, we would see that the nation-state actor Strontium, well known in Russian cyber circles, attacked government targets in the province known as Vinnytsia. And 2 days later, we would see a missile strike at Vinnytsia airport. When we would look at destructive wiper malware that was being launched in April against entities in Lviv, then similar entities were physically targeted at the beginning of May. So you would see a cyber attack and then followed by a very short amount of time later, you would see the physical attack coming. It changes how we think about cyber warfare and warfare generally. When attacks that are going to come in the physical world will have a cyber component that comes first. That's something we had never experienced before. And as we think about how governments will need to deal with future cyber and physical conflict, it is a perspective shift. The thing that is important to keep in mind is that the Russian government was targeting significant numbers of countries outside of the conflict zone in the run-up to and since the start of the war. Now, it comes as no surprise. Nation-state actors have been collecting intelligence from targets as long as there have been spies. What was significant was seeing the depth and breadth of targets that Russian actors were engaged in intelligence or espionage collection activities, trying to gain information and insight about military and potential NATO response and government response to the conflict. So we are continuing to monitor Russian activity and collection efforts against both the United States and the large number of countries you see represented here. We have not seen a decline in that targeting. By June, we were deep into the conflict. The cyber components that we had observed had continued unabated, but we started to see an evolution and a new tactic that became clearer. In the early days of tracking nation states, it was intelligence collection. The beginning of the war taught us that there was a new nation state tactic, and that's destructive attack activity. And then as we studied and followed the activity of Russian actors, it opened up a new front, and that was the front of information or influence operations. And that's really what our June report highlights in ways that we had not discussed previously. It was an evolution of the cyber battlefield. It was happening incredibly quickly. And we saw four main audiences that were being targeted by influence operations. First, efforts aimed at the Russian population, trying to drum up support for the war effort. Second, efforts aimed at the Ukrainian population, similar to the example that we show here on the slide, where misinformation was shared about the health of President Zelensky. Third, influence operations aimed at both American and European audiences, trying to undermine Western unity in response and support for the war. And then lastly, we saw influence operations that were aimed at populations in non-aligned countries. And while it's harder to ascertain specific motives in these cases, it is likely that these influence operations were aimed at sustaining support within the United Nations and in other international organizations for Russian activity. This is a change. We have not had to consider influence operations as what we would call in the threat intel community a TTP, tactic, a technique, or procedure that was in the common domain of nation-state actors, like a piece of malware or a vulnerability. Now we do, and that was one of the key takeaways from our report in June. One of the examples that we used in the report was to highlight that Russian propaganda was being successful. In the beginning, towards the end of February, we saw a spike in the consumption of Russian propaganda that increased in Ukraine over 400%. And while it peaked in March of 2022 and has steadily declined since, it's a reminder to all of us that as we're thinking about the consumption of propaganda, it is a new thing that we will need to work on how we defend against as a tool in our toolbox from a cyber warfare perspective. So what are some of the key lessons that we've learned and takeaways from our experience? Really, the war in the Ukraine showed us that destructive attacks at scale and influence operations are the future of modern cyber warfare. This is going to change how governments and militaries think about planning and preparation for conflict. It's going to change how we all think about response and defense, because destructive attacks, like we saw in the early days of the war, where in the very first week, the Russians launched 22 separate destructive attacks against Ukrainian targets, mean that we will all need to be prepared for how we identify these attacks before they hit our networks and how we respond to them when they do. The second big takeaway is that digital transformation and the cloud are key to combating nation-state attackers. If you are not in the cloud, when you fight a nation-state attack in an on-premises environment, you're largely engaging in hand-to-hand combat. When the war broke out in the Ukraine, Ukrainian law prohibited governments from using cloud services, and state-owned enterprises were similarly restricted. That meant that a significant amount of Ukrainian infrastructure was within the territorial boundaries of Ukraine. That was a significant challenge because when those data centers fell under attack, government needed to make a rapid shift and needed to be able to develop and leverage cloud technologies and partner with Microsoft in order to be able to spot and remediate those attacks. That was really essential to maintaining continuity of government. The other big takeaway when we look at nation-state attacks, both coming out of Ukraine and generally, is that these are largely intelligence collection operations. An intelligence agency or a military is getting tasked to collect information and achieve an objective. And they will leverage any open door that they can in order to achieve that objective. So if systems are unpatched, if multi-factor authentication is not applied, if passwords are weak, nation states will take care of that. They won't spend the money on a complex, sophisticated attack if they don't have to. In the case of Ukraine, we leveraged our Risk IQ technology in order to scan for unpatched systems and provided that information to the government of Ukraine, which has worked incredibly hard to identify unpatched or low-patched systems across the government and in critical infrastructure, and essentially burn down that list of vulnerable systems. That's really key. We see nation states take advantage of weak passwords all of the time. It's a part of their toolbox. And so when you think about these attacks as objectives from nation states, it shows how much more seriously we need to take the threat. The next key takeaway for Microsoft is that we need to expand the definition of critical infrastructure. Historically, when we look at critical infrastructure, it's been fairly consistent for the past 20 years. IT, communications, power, health, transportation, these are all not surprising. What our data showed prior to the Ukrainian invasion was that 90% of nation-state attack activity was actually not aimed at critical infrastructure itself. It was being aimed at think tanks, NGOs, policy advisors, diplomats, those who are creating information or ideas that advise governments. And that is a community of experts and influencers that have not historically been treated as critical infrastructure. Nation states know this, and so they are an extremely common target. While we have seen an increase, as Vincent pointed out, in the scope and targeting of critical infrastructure, particularly last summer with massive password spray campaigns coming from Russia and as well as from Iran over the summer and fall and the run-up to the war. The targeting of these advisors, including academic experts in universities, is something that we need to think differently about because it is the low-hanging fruit for nation-state collection activities. Next, we see that when governments are taking the lead in hardening infrastructure and talking more publicly about threats, that has a collateral effect of lifting all major critical infrastructures and enterprises to follow along. That leadership opportunity has a major, major impact. And then lastly, when we look at how we think about national resilience and the continuity of a nation state during times of conflict, What's really fascinating about Ukraine, as I mentioned, is that at the outbreak of hostilities, the government was not allowed to use cloud services. Now, we've migrated 17 of Ukraine's major government agencies into our cloud, and a significant amount of Ukrainian government operation takes place outside of the country's borders. That's profound. As we think about nation states and resiliency and continuity of government and continuity of operation, the ability to shift nationally important data and functions outside of a country's borders rapidly and without loss of functionality is going to become a new national security priority. That's something that Ukraine did, and Ukraine did first. And it's a really important lesson as we indulge in conversations around the world about how we balance the importance of national sovereignty and threat and risk against the clear and present danger that occurred when data centers were physically threatened in Ukraine. And the Ukrainian government needed to continue to provide essential services for its people and to continue its own work. So that's a very high-level view of some of the priorities that we've observed over the past 6 months of working in Ukraine, as well as over 5 years of notifying customers of nation-state cyber attacks that we see. So where do we think that things are going? Obviously, the conflict continues, and we continue to advise and identify attack activity to the government of Ukraine. There were public reports yesterday about Ukraine's concern of a risk of heightened threat from an electrical and, I believe, communications sector perspective. That's important to focus on. Nobody knows what will happen. That's the nature of conflict. But continuing to focus on the basics, on hardening security infrastructure, on ensuring smart hygiene with passwords, multi-factor authentication, and patching, and identifying where key workloads can be migrated into the cloud in order to provide resilient operations. Those have been key to Ukraine's success, and we believe that they're key to be part of Ukraine's future. So with that, I will stop and turn it back over to Vincent, and I look forward to the panel discussion and any of the questions that you have that will come up in the next section of our conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cristin, for giving us such a great summary of the key learning in the last couple of months. And I'm also glad to share with you actually our support, like Cristin mentioned, to support the Ukrainian government actually have been publicly recognized by the Ukrainian government. We received a Peace Award by the Ukrainian government on July 4th. It's also an independent day. It's a special meaning, and we are glad to continue support, provide all these, I believe, all the key learning that Cristin just mentioned, like the hygiene, the propaganda, misinformation, and migrate to cloud. They all could apply to not just Taiwan, but could also apply to Japan and Korea in these northeast regions. And so next, like Cristin mentioned, after Cristin, we'll have 3 great panels. We have a 10 minutes sharing, and after that, we'll have a panel discussion, prepare 3 rounds of questions, and then I will reserve some time for Q&A. So please leave your question for our online audience. You can leave your question at the chat room, and for our friends here on site, please, you may just raise your hand and come forward to the microphone if you have any question in the Q&A section. So, without further ado, I would introduce our good friends Kenny Huang for the sharing for Taiwan, and Kenny is actually an old friend, definitely no stranger for the Taiwan and also in our TWNIC and also in Asia. He is the managing director and the CEO of TWNIC, and also leading figures of the internet communities in Asia. Since the early years of Taiwan's internet development, he contributed a great deal to build up a better and a very solid internet environment for Taiwan. And because of tremendous knowledge and experience, he has been invited to take up leading role in many internet technology and policy organizations. And Kenny currently also chairing a working group to recommend the policy of the selection of the IDN. And he's also keen on the topic like domain name system security extensions, internet governance, policy development, stakeholder engagement, and devoted in encourage, especially the young people, young generation participation in these communities. So, Kenny, the floor is yours for 10 minutes sharing.
Okay, right. Thank you, Vincent. And also thank you, Cristin, for a very insightful presentation. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for anyone who joined online remotely. This is Kenny Huang. It's my honor to give in the speech. So starting from today's topic, when we try to identify critical infrastructure, first of all, we need to identify how internet works from global perspective. Basically, internet, a lot of people consider internet will be a wireless internet. For example, we have 4G, 5G, even we're talking about 6G or even satellite communication. But from global perspective, all the internet basically only in the very last mile, within your household, within your last 100 meters, that belong to wireless world. The rates actually are wild. No matter how you connect to, everything will be wild. So from global perspective, internet is a combination for undersea cable and also DNS. So you can see all the, like a US state government strategy based on internet, basically they focus on two issues. The first issue will be the undersea cable. The second issue will be the control of the DNS. So that will be considered a critical element of the internet. So here I just quote from the national interest that was published in 2018. And he's talking about the topic, how the World War III could start. And he just breaking the topic, starting from cutting the cables. Why? Because the cable, they carry more than 95% of every day on the global internet. So basically, according to, so undersea cable was considered as great legal zone. According to United Nations Convention Law of the Sea, they declare that undersea cable attack is not hostile action. So which means undersea cable can be identified as a legitimate military target, according to UNLOS. So every country can legally take an undersea cable as a legal military target when you have any military operation. So the Luzon Strait near Philippines, where all undersea cable connecting to Taiwan, Korea, Japan is highly vulnerable checkpoint because a lot of undersea cable, they are highly concentrated in this Luzon Strait. So that's the undersea cable surrounding by Taiwan nearby ocean. So for example, like you can see undersea cable pass near the Taiwan major checkpoint because a lot of undersea cable, they just connecting to the nearby Taiwan or just not too far from Taiwan. And also we can see from the three-dimensional map, you can see a lot of deep champs in the area, Pacific Ocean, especially near Taiwan. So the cable resilience solution actually are desperately needed. So back to today's topic on what happened during Ukraine, especially what kind of communication happened in the Ukraine war. So because at the starting of the Ukraine war, Ukraine asked for support from Starlink at the beginning of the war with Russia. So the Starlink basically every month send a Starlink terminal to Ukraine and activate Starlink service in Ukraine area. So in the right-hand side, you can see the map. There are several ground stations, not inside the Ukraine, but outside the Ukraine. They provide a responding service for all the Starlink service. So we're still during the Ukraine war, sorry. And US quickly identify the strategic importance of DNS after Russia invasion of Ukraine. Like US NTIA already hand over the control of global DNS since 2016. So the Congress report, they suggest that US should review the relationship between US government and the ICANN, and also need to strengthen the US leadership within the ICANN. And second paragraph is back to ITU, because ITU is basically leading by, for example, like the current Secretary General is from China. So US should review US relationship in ITU and also should join the ITU Secretary General election that will be done this year, end of this year. So let's now change the scenario back to Taiwan. If the Ukraine war happened to Taiwan, what will be happen? That was reported by Wall Street Journal, and that I quote something written in the Wall Street Journal. If China invade Taiwan, disconnecting all Taiwan from the war by cutting undersea cable would greatly improve China's chance of succeed. So basically, I also have around 1 hour interview by Wall Street Journal and 1 hour conversation. Eventually, get about 5 word quote in the Wall Street Journal. We are vulnerable during the conversation. So that also another report issued at 1st of May this year. That's from U.S. Naval Institute Proceeding. And they also quote, if China invade Taiwan, U.S. Marine Corps should help destroy it with Taiwan cable landing station and data center to eliminate the PLA, stand for People Liberation Army, ability to repurpose the critical infrastructure. So that means if China invade Taiwan and eventually it's going to be succeed, that's a lot of people worry about, because it could be the first attack become an end game. So we need to avoid that situation happen to prevent the first war become an end game. So in that condition, probably we need to consider destroy all the critical infrastructure instead of protecting the critical infrastructure at that time. It's not going to be an end game. So the major choke point need to be targeted to be for the cable landing station, since the 99% internet data is routed through the cable landing station. So you can see the cable landing station traffic share. I didn't write down the detailed number because of that concern with the national security. So just show some diagram. You can see the traffic share among different cable landing station. Bali cable station, landing station, Danshui cable landing station, and also Toten cable landing station. On the right-hand side was the article published by Wall Street Journal on the 21st of September last week. And he's doing some simulation, and not only simulation, the first diagram, he shows if China, they launch a missile target to Taiwan cable landing station, would look like that kind of scenario. And in the right-hand side below, that will be another real case, because during China has military operation simulation in September, last month, sorry. And there's a cable outage just on the north of Taiwan. And the cable maintenance ship tried to fix the cable, but because China military operation, so this cable maintenance ship was prohibited to go to provide maintenance operation at that area. So if the situation change, become a conflict between China or Taiwan, that's real practice you can see that's a real situation. So we can also see the network connectivity and resilience in different countries. The density stands for network connectivity within the country. For example, like the US, you have more than 26,000 network connected to each other. If there is more network connected to each other, that means you have more resilience because you have multiple choice in the route selection. And Taiwan will be there on the right-hand side, down to the right-hand side. You can see Taiwan the density of network connectivity was very selected. That means the resilience among Taiwan Island basically is more vulnerable than the other countries. So we're talking about Ukraine. They try to utilize Starlink technology. And so here, just quickly summarize, Starlink is nothing, satellite communication is nothing magical, because Starlink claims they have intercellular link. So I break down the intercellular topology as the show here. You can see even the end user communication goes to the dash, send a signal to Starlink, a low orbit satellite. And all the traffic go to intercellular communication link, and eventually they still need to send to the ground station. Going to the ground station, sending to Starlink Network Operation Center, the AS number 14593. through the AS14593, they're peering with different service provider, and eventually still rolling back to DNS, follow the IANA route topology, follow the DNS direction to point out how can you connect to the rest of the world. So the rest of the communication system basically is no different compared to current undersea cable connection. So what kind of policy we can potentially could have? How can we provide choke point resilience? And that's one thing we propose is government intervention model. Intervention model consider two dimensions. The first dimension will be, is the public infrastructure financially sustainable? Second dimension is, should government should intervene in the infrastructure development? And we can see in the OES side, if the public infrastructure financial sustainable and government still interfere the market operation, that means that the public infrastructure will compete with the private sector. So that's happened in Germany, Swiss, and Netherlands. So we should prevent that kind of situation. And the other is the government didn't step in because didn't stay in if the public infrastructure is not financially sustainable on the right-hand side, and the government didn't step in, that become a right button, become a supplier of last resort. That means the existing operator will take everything for granted, reduce the quality, and increase the price for end user because the government didn't intervene for the market operation. So we propose to the government is government can consider provide a public infrastructure, but at the same time try to reduce the entry barrier for newcomer and also try to stimulate the investment. So let's basically go to the traditional internet governance function. We're talking about more technical internet governance function, talking about unique number, unique name, and unique protocol. So the internet governance model can be split into, we're talking about left-hand side and right-hand side. Left-hand side will be the traditional way. It's a multi-stakeholder model, such as ICANN, Regional Internet Registry, IETF, CCTLD. That's all based on multi-stakeholder model. On the right-hand side will be cyber sovereignty model, like a Great Wall Firewall of China. And Russia also have an internet isolation bill. So regarding to the policy-wise, do we rely on government define the policy, or do we rely on multi-stakeholder define the policy for themselves? Not policy, sorry, should be a cyber norm. So it really depends on the government capability and capacity. If the government have more capability and more capacity, and so that will be but private sector doesn't have that kind of capability and capacity. So that will be the first column that belong to state regulation. If government that doesn't good at that kind of new topic in terms of capacity and capability, but private sector, they are more capable to dealing with that kind of special issue, like you rolling into the self-regulation. So you can see most of the internet governance institution right now, they're based on the multi-stakeholder model, that's bottom-up decision-making process. They're based on contractual obligation, contractual compliance as well. So we back to the Ukraine situation. Since 28th of May this year until 4th of March this year, all the Ukraine critical infrastructure, that's UACCTLD, has been migrated from domestic operation to foreign operation. So I need to move quickly. So that creates another issue because that kind of issue could become a sovereignty and jurisdiction issue. And also consider enforceability of law because a seizure warrant for the dominant public cannot exercise because they're moving to the country outside your jurisdiction. So last first internet session happened. Ukraine asked ICANN to remove Russia CCTLD, but ICANN rejected. Ukraine also requests RIPE NCC to revoke Russia IPv4 and IPv6 address, and RIPE also rejected. But eventually, ICANN still moved down the .su CCTLD since it doesn't exist in ISO 3166 list. And that belongs to self-regulation. And RIPE NCC frozen all the IPv4 and IPv6 address held by Russia UBO, ultimate beneficial owner, that including state-owned ISP. So that belongs to state regulation. So in the future, Multi-stakeholder is very likely to propose the internet session proposal that has been proposed on the 10th of March. That means military and propaganda agency and their information infrastructure are potential target for sanction by internet governance institution. So in the future cyber conflict, we probably have two kinds of sanction. The first sanction comes from the court order that based on economic sanction compliance. The second sanction based on the internet governance institution and policy. And based on the policy, they try to self-regulate sanction. Okay, some key takeaway. We need to redefine what would be the resilience because that we always need to consider the worst case scenario will happen and we need to take in corresponding measure. And cybersecurity plan for reinforcement operation and for recovery operation could be totally opposite. For example, like I mentioned, at the initial for the first attack, we try our best to protect the critical infrastructure. But once it almost become the end game, we need to destroy the critical infrastructure in order to let the critical infrastructure become repurposed by the enemy. And also repurpose the checkpoint dual use design. And we also need to define data priority scheme and also internet fragmentation as well. Sorry, take too much time. That will be the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny. For actually, I think it's also a great echo back with what Cristin shared that we need to expand the critical infrastructure. Probably TWNIC could be defined as a critical infra very soon. So let me quickly welcome and introduce Professor Kyungho Lee, who is our Associate Professor, Graduate School of Information Security, Center for Information Security Technologies, Korean University. And Professor Lee received his BS and MS degree in Mathematics and Information and Communication from Songgang University. And his PhD degree is in Information Security from Korea University. He has been a professor in the Department of Cyber Defense and the Graduate School of Information Security at Korea University since 2005. And Professor Lee devoted himself in the area of risk management, security counseling, privacy policy, privacy impact assessment, machine learning, and blockchain. In 2014 and 2007, he received a ministerial citation from the Minister of Information and Communication and the Minister of Interior and Safety. He has professional certification for CISA by ISAC and BS 7799 LA lead auditor and the BS 25999 lead auditors, and also received a Microsoft certified solution experts. And he also served as the CISO and the CPO of Navier from 2009 to 2015. So without any further ado, let me welcome and give the floor to Professor Lee.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Good evening, Madam, Ms. Goodwin, and good morning, everyone. My name is Kyungho Lee, Professor at Korea University. Thank you for your interest in today's session regarding critical infrastructure cybersecurity after the Ukraine war. First, I will summarize the cyber attack responses within South Korea. South Korea has been a target to cyber attacks that utilize social engineering tactics and advanced tools. As shown in the timeline, cyber attacks has been persistent from the beginning of the 21st century. Primarily Internet riot on 2003, a DDoS attack in 2009, and massive network paralysis on 2013 caused the national level damage. Now in 2022, recent cyber attacks include attempts of leaking information by a successful ransomware distribution performed by an active duty captain to a North Korean hacker, as well as a North Korean Lazarus group. Storing the database of threat actor, motive, victim, and cyber attack damage scales is crucial. Furthermore, cyber attack technology must be reviewed at a national level, and cyber trends also should be researched to prepare for future attacks. The table categorizes by threat actor, scale of damage, and motive of the ransomware attacks performed on South Korea to identify the cyber attack trends. The origin and motive of the attack must be identified to persistently defend by CTA or ATP groups. Collaboration network must be secured to accomplish real-time identification of cyber attacks with a platform to strengthen the information distribution for a collaborative response. In order to do so, a system must be built to share and standardize the intelligence. Currently, ITUT supports CSTI, Cybersecurity Information Exchange, via CyBEX. CSTI's main standards include STIX, TAXI, and CyBOX. For CTI standardization, you need to understand the TTP, which is tactics, techniques, and procedures for short. Response strategies against the similar attacks can be collected through attacker profiling results, collected through TTP of the threat actors or groups. TTP is located at the highest position in the 6 pages of CTI. It can be used to analyze the various characteristics of persistent threat groups. Also, TTP based on the keychain model can show the structure of the attacker's infiltration method. A MITRE attack based on hostile TTP can be used to derive a specific group's threat method. TTP is located at the highest section of IOC, indicator of compromise. It is the #1 priority to plan a defense strategy against the cyber attack groups. For example, the IOC infliction indicators further identify attack indicators that can be used by the network defender at an attack scenario. And then, from the IOC left by the cyber attack group, TTP is analyzed and understood. There are various ongoing projects in South Korea that aim to respond to cyber attacks by APT groups. Our lab has analyzed the TTP from the criminal compliant scenario against the Jinhyuk Park, a member of the North Korean APT group Lazarus. Through the criminal compliant released by FBI against Jinhyuk Park, we have performed the time series analysis on the Sony hacking incident based on the attack TTP from MITRE. A time sequence analysis of the Sony hacking incident shows the strategy, technology, and procedure of the cyber attack, in other words, TTP, of the North Korean Lazarus group. In the year 2014, the Lazarus group leaked the huge chunk of information, including the emails and personal information of Sony Pictures employees, as well as copies of unreleased released movies. The TTP analysis of the Sony hacking incident shows that it was identical to the malware used in South Korea's cyber terror incident that happened on June 25th. Tactic initial access, which was used by the Lazarus group, can be used to map the currently shown cyber defense strategy. The previous analysis of Sony Pictures hacker tactics are mapped as mitigation. For example, the first tactic, initial access, includes 4 different methods, including drive-by compromise. Thus, we can connect the mapped tactics and technology responses and understand which type of mitigation needs to be used in the initial phase. A defense strategy was made through the cyber threat TTP time series analysis of Jinhyuk Park's criminal compliance. And now, not only that, but also the attack tactics and technology was extracted. In addition, a defense strategy can be compiled by analyzing methods used by the hackers attack group and mapping methods on attack mitigation. TTP framework has been applied not only to the Lazarus group, but also to North Korean cyber threat groups, including APT-37, APT-38, Kimsuki, and Thorium. After verification through multiple academic papers, a comparison of each threat group's TTP was made after the analysis. At the end, the cyber threat group's TTP can be used to infer the APT group, which then can be used to identify the attack source, ultimately showing the motive. A cooperative network is essential for real-time response to cyber threats. International companies and agencies must work hard to respond and prevent cyber threats with progressing intelligence and advancement. Building a system for cyber threat analysis and information sharing will be the crucial factors for this. Threat IPs or ransomware needs to be identified, blocked, and stored in a database to be shared on a cooperative network. South Korea currently employs the Cyber Threat Analysis and Sharing System, CTAS, as well as a security expert consultative chain called Intelligence to share information. Like it is shown on the slide, further research is in progress to build a more advanced CTI sharing system. Under the government strategy of establishing trust and cooperative governance, national system needs to be established in order to support efficient sharing of cyber threat information. It is essential for national security that we continue to discover ways to share public-private cyber threat information as much as possible, and actively promote information sharing with overseas specialized agencies to respond to global cyber threat. At the end of the day, the most important point of national cyber threat management is establishing a preventive system, and the key to the platform is sharing the information. A collective CTI ecosystem will be needed at the national level to continue attacks by APT groups equipped with new technologies and defenses. Thank you for your attention. I hope this session has sparked an attention for your collective understanding towards the matters. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Lee, for giving a very comprehensive introduction about TTP framework and also quite special, but some of the general challenges that Korea is facing right now. So let me welcome our next expert from Japan, Dr. Koichiro Komiyama, also known as Sparky. Sparky is the Director and the Global Coordination Division, Japan, Computer Emergency Response Team. And his primary role to enhance international collaboration with overseas CSIRTs and to support the establishment and operation of CSIRTs. He takes an active role in regional and global communities, such as the first forum of incident response in the security teams, APCERT, Asia Pacific, Computer Emergency Response Team, and also the CGSC, the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace. He is also a research scholar at Keio University Global Research Institute. And his research interests including international relations, global governance in cybersecurity, and ICT4D. He holds a PhD in media and governance from the Keio universities. So let's welcome Sparky. Please share your experience in Japan.
Thank you very much. And you know, the three geniuses before me had already talked about all the important things. So I think I have a few things which I need to explain to you. But let me begin with as Cristin pointed out, we are witnessing a new form of cyber warfare. Until now, cyber warfare has been considered as an act of war on the internet. Example includes disinformation, espionage, compromise to a critical system, etc. We all assumed internet connection is remain unavailable even during a war. And the war in Ukraine, however, the communication infrastructure was destroyed. Satellite, television, mobile telecommunication, and others. So, to me, as an expert in cybersecurity, Russian cyber operation, like spreading wiper malware or ransomware, stealing information from Ukraine government, those cyber operations may not be as successful as we previously estimated, but the destruction of infrastructure is causing a hardship for, first of all, people in Ukraine, and then Ukraine government and military as well. And finding or lessons learned for Japan is back in 2008, we had drafted a new defense program, and that was the first program emphasizing the importance of the protection of space, cyber, and electromagnetic, in addition to the traditional areas of operation like land, sea, and air. So since then, we worked hard to protect the space and protect the satellites. What we found from the case in Ukraine is Ukraine loses satellite communication, not because there's any trouble in satellite up in air. Instead, the modems, their asset on the ground was compromised, and that was the reason, their communication goes offline. So, maybe we should pay more attention to our asset on the ground. So that's my, first observation from the war. And then the second point is, this is really, I may be repeating many of the things Kenny already pointed out, but the internet is becoming increasingly fragmented. And Kenny already explained the interaction between Ukraine government and Russian government and internet governance community like RIPE, ICANN, and others. I also like to note, both RIPE and ICANN, the internet governance community, express their commitment to remain neutral in this situation, and their commitment to protect the free, open global network. However, RIPE simultaneously announced, that it would no longer assign new IP address spaces to any organization affiliated to Russia, because they are based in Netherlands and they are part of EU. So they have no choice but to comply with EU's ruling, economic sanction in particular. So while we all hope to have a global one internet for one world, we have rules, and we have pressure to fragment this space. And the ISPs, they have different perspective. Most of Russian telecom operators, ISP, they bought transit from major ISPs in US, UK, Denmark. So the major ISPs provide connectivity to Russian ISP, and in return, Russian ISP pay for the traffic. Since March this year, there have been signs of reduction in such contracts, and specifically in March, a leading UK ISP, ISP in British ISP, they terminated contract with 2 Russian operators. So this is really where the contradiction lies. While advocating for one global internet, we are forced to follow the state regulation. And this is also my own problem. I have many friends in Russian antivirus company called Kaspersky. They have highly technical skills and have been very supportive over the years in reducing cybercrime affecting Japanese organization. Their products are still very high quality. There's a high performance product made by well-respected engineers. But given the political situation, I cannot recommend a Japanese company to keep using Kaspersky's product. So this is a matter of deep concern to me, and this is this may not be a matter of fragmented internet. It is because the whole world is being divided, and we have to deal with it. My last point is, again, already covered by Kenny. The need for resilience. We should learn from the history. Given the lesson learned from the war in Ukraine, I expect a situation in Japan in which multiple submarine cables are cut, data centers are attacked, maybe cruise missile to our data centers, and then some logical infrastructure such as social media, will go offline. And the most important thing is, it is not possible to completely prevent the destruction of those infrastructures. And the resilience is the most important thing. Resilience in this context is ability to recover from broken infrastructures. During World War I, Britain, France, and Germany, they fought each other and mutually destroyed each other's physical communication infrastructures. While there was no significant difference in their ability to destroy each other's infrastructure, Germany, they lacked the ability to recover destroyed cable and radio signal station, and was therefore, put at a disadvantage. Germany eventually lose the war. During World War II, Japan lose 70% of its pre-war telephone network. Japan did not have the capacity to repair the destroyed telecom network, and Japan lose it. So, assuming, it is impossible to prevent the physical infrastructure being destroyed, and it is necessary to establish a mean to bypass it if it is destroyed and to repair, even if it is destroyed. So, and talking about the resilience, I think the key factor or key contributor to keep our infrastructure resilient is our engineers on the ground, who are at the forefront of ensuring the resilience of this physical infrastructure. So even right now, Ukrainian telecom operators, they are repairing telephone network in an area where severe battles are ongoing, and they stay in the car during the night and dig up the frozen ground in the middle of the night when the Russian soldiers are out of their sight, and repeatedly reconnect the fiber cable. This is a quote from interview from CEO of Ukraine Telecom. So that too is a form of war in our time, and this is my end of my presentation. I like to discuss with other panelists on this one further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sparky. Yeah, we are a little bit overrun, so I will try to squeeze some time from the panel discussion. I will kind of consolidate the 3 round of questions into 2. The first one, actually, I think it's great to hear all different observation and the issue that each of the experts has identified. So maybe could each of you identify no more than 3, the key challenges? I think a lot of you already mentioned that there's some key challenges you already observed. So what's the 3 key challenges you observe right now from our topic today for the critical infra security protections? So maybe I was from the start, from the sequence, maybe Cristin, you could share with the 3 minutes your suggestion on the 3 key challenges. Yeah.
Sure, I'm happy to. So I think one of the most important challenges for critical infrastructure is to be aware of the threat. And an example of this is the threat to industrial control systems. During the Ukraine conflict, we watched Russian actors compromise Schneider Electric and other industrial control systems, power and HVAC, or high voltage air conditioning control systems, as a way to have a control over the ability to turn on or off a data center. Well, they couldn't turn on or off a data center. Manipulation of industrial control systems was such an important tactic that the US government released an advisory about it in April. It's a really easy area to overlook because the heating and control and power systems are in every building that we're in. They're in the building you're sitting in, they're in the building that I'm in. It's a part of critical infrastructure that we're all dependent upon and is easy to overlook. So it's important to think about that. Number 2, cyber hygiene. When I was describing the Russian tactics and threats that we're seeing, none of the tactics that we have seen, I won't say none, an overwhelming majority of the tactics we have seen deployed during the war are not sophisticated. They're not Tom Cruise coming from the ceiling during Mission Impossible with all the wires. They're very basic things like having complex passwords or making sure that you've installed a patch. So it's really critical for government and critical infrastructure to bring the conversation back to the importance of cyber hygiene. That is low-hanging fruit. Those are the things that cyber criminals exploit first. They're the things that nation states exploit first. And so we really do need to take them off the table. So that's item number 2. Item number 3 for critical infrastructure is to come back to the point that I made during my remarks, that if you're staying on premises, you are fighting nation-state attackers hand to hand. When you come into the cloud, you have the ability to leverage security teams that hunt nation-state attackers, that develop protections and deploy them at scale, and then continue and go back and repeat again and again. So you have the ability to bring a much larger team to the fight. That's worked well in Ukraine, that'll continue to work well in Ukraine, that will work well for critical infrastructures. We've seen that our cloud is incredibly resilient to nation-state attacks. They're almost overwhelmingly not successful. And so as critical infrastructures are deciding what to do, making sure that they are paying attention to their industrial control systems, and to that I'd also add a little supply chain, that they are working to improve cyber hygiene, excuse me, I have a bit of a cold, and that they are migrating to the cloud wherever possible are the top 3 things that critical infrastructure should think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Cristin. So next, Kenny.
Okay, right, thank you. Sorry, a little bit delay. 3 points, 3 challenge. First challenge I mentioned here is, follow my slide, is a resilient redefine. I believe all the critical infrastructure, no matter how well they define, no matter how well they try to defend the cyber attack, all the cyber attack prevention plan actually was prepared for the peacetime. None of the critical infrastructure was prepared for the wartime because all the peacetime incidents cannot compare with any single wartime attack. So that's quite significant difference compared to wartime and versus peacetime. So under the Ukraine situation, we need to consider, is our prevention plan already cover the wartime requirement? So we need to always need to consider the worst case scenario and taking corresponding measure based on wartime, not only in the peacetime. That's first challenge. Second challenge, I try to echo, I didn't mention here, sorry, I try to echo Cristin's point. I think that's critical, the cyber hygiene. Because majority of the cyber attack basically is end user target. Because the entire supply chain, end user seems to be the vulnerable point. Once you attack to the end user, then you can penetrate the entire supply chain to the root. So end user protection, take one example, I didn't bring the slide here. If you choose, for example, like a password, Cristin just mentioned, if password only 8 bytes, consider uppercase, lowercase, based on current computational power, it can be break within 2 minutes, if 8 bytes. If the length increase to 11 bytes, based on today's computing power, we're not talking about quantum computing, we're talking about today, commercial available computational power. If you increase to 11 bytes, combination including uppercase, lowercase, and special character as well, that can be, the breaking time could be 40 years. So you consider additional 3 bytes, how valuable it is. A little bit inconvenient for the user, just along with another 3 bytes. But in terms of the cost, it's marginal cost when you do that kind of cyber major. But the outcome is significant improved. So I cannot emphasize the importance of cyber hygiene. It's probably more important than any kind of military cyber attack prevention plan, because all the target, all the cyber leakage actually come from the supply chain and come from the end user, especially internal stuff. So third point I try to mention now is it become inevitable is internet fragmentation. Due to geopolitical situation, due to different countries, they are concerned about are they willing to do the one worldwide internet openly? And also a lot of countries still are concerned with the US government. So the internet fragmentation become inevitable. So we need to have an idea, what if the internet break down into several internet? And all the e-commerce will be divided based on how many fragments it divided. So I think that's a 3 major challenge from my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny. So Dr. Lee, Professor Lee.
Yeah, today's my keyword is information sharing and collaboration. I think in the field, they need the action exactly at that time. They must identify and get some options based on return on investment. So for this, reliable information sharing is very important. I think it is recommended that information be done separately from low level to high level. This is because there are more opportunities to verify each other. Initially, you only need to share information, but as the trust deepens, we can investigate together. It is necessary to make this process into a database. So these activities can be bilateral as well as multilateral. Standardization should, of course, be considered together. So we are using based on MITRE standards of the US government that been needed. Second, for collaboration, I think the objective that both countries are trying to protect must be same. Collaboration is difficult when one party benefits and the other loses. Therefore, it is necessary for each other to identify what they want to protect and exchange their lists and confirm that there is a common interest. Extending these activities could put in place protocol such as, for example, Geneva Conventions like that. The most realistic approach is to back up each other based on the policy bilateral, I think.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Lee. So, Sparky, what's your suggestion? Yeah.
Thank you. So in the Ukraine case, it is obvious. It was Microsoft that put together the report with the most comprehensive understanding of cyber threats, what's happening in Ukraine and in the region. No nation state has the kind of data that Microsoft has. And we somehow have been relying on information provided by Microsoft. Now, bigger question, in today's society, we assume the order by sovereign states. If anything goes wrong, government of Japan or government of India, they have their rule and they must, they force other actors do this way. And so, you know, the big question is, do business, citizens, and myself, do we want protection by the state? Or do we want protection by big tech? Like we should scroll our data to Microsoft data center? What if it is not Microsoft, but Alibaba Cloud? Who is more trustworthy? Is it Taiwanese government or Microsoft? So that's the bigger problem we have right now. And we are talking about cybersecurity and security. This is really the area, national security. This is really the area that, you know, government solely, you know, in charge of. And even looking back the history, we could not find any case that, you know, private sector have such kind of direct power into this area. So, you know, I see many Microsoft colleagues here in this panel, that the transparency that you could provide is the key for additional, additional success and the stability of cyberspace in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sparky. And thank you for your recognition for Microsoft. Actually, just also share with you, Cristin knows very well we'll have another annual global cybersecurity defense report will be published soon. So that will be another good example that we try to be more transparent and share the information with our, not just our customer, but the government and the worldwide. Yeah. So my final question for the panel, I know we have a lot of good discussion, and then I will open the floor for Q&A. The final question for our expert here, actually more like a summary of today. And fortunately, we have the honor to have an expert from US, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. And we also discussed this cyber attack is actually cross-border. So from cross-border collaboration perspective, what's your one suggestion, 2 minutes suggestion, kind of quick summary for today? What's the cross-border collaboration recommendation you suggest that we could work together to ensure the security and the resilience to protect our critical infra? So I will kind of reverse the order. So Sparky, sorry, you'll be the first to answer this question.
Okay. So as Professor Lee pointed out, in the technical level, we have many way of enhance or capitalize our information sharing with each other. We have ITU standard and many private driven standard. What I like to do a quick advertisement here is, first, Forum of Incident Response Team recently published the Traffic Light Protocol to help or to level the confidentiality on any information sharing between each others. This is like having a level to any email message, chat message. This is a TLP led. You cannot share this information any further and others. So we have like 4 or 5 categories to flag, to clearly express how this information should be handled. So those type of on the ground regulation will, I hope, will enhance the information sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sparky. So Professor Lee?
Yeah. I think I can say we needed the structure of cooperative actions based on some point. That means ecosystem of information sharing. For example, we can say Interpol has an innovative center in Singapore. There are many people are saying as representative of their nation, their countries. They usually sharing and criminal information on the on-site. This kind of example is very insightful for us, especially cyber area. I think we have to promote this kind of structure and ecosystem to develop to further, I think.
Thank you. So, Kenny?
Okay, right, thank you. I probably mentioned yesterday, sorry, different section, because in Taiwan, we advocate cybersecurity is national security. So that means the importance of cybersecurity is getting more important compared to from the nation perspective. But basically, the conflict between states actually happened in the real world. So if you consider that kind of relationship among different states, they probably already have different conflict. And not to mention, actually, a lot of cyber attack was initiated by state-sponsored attack. So according to that, if looking for a state-to-state multilateral collaboration, I think that would be a little bit harder. But there are one thing would be considered would be minor and would be more resilience would be the capacity building, because consider capacity building will be the beneficial will be the trainer and the people who attending the training course. So capacity building could be one way to eliminate that kind of tension among different states. So among state collaboration, I think capacity building will be one of the cutting points that people can look into. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kenny. So, Cristin?
I think there are 2 points that I would emphasize. First, that critical infrastructure is so vast that governments will truly need to prioritize which risks and which parts of infrastructure are going to get resourced or attention first. Because the all threats, all hazards approach is important when you are thinking about securing your whole ecosystem. But when you're faced with a crisis, the ability to prioritize and allocate resources is really critical. So as governments are thinking about true critical infrastructure security and resilience, the ability to prioritize is key. The second aspect of protecting critical infrastructures between government and the private sector is almost a math problem, if you think about it. There's a statistic that I love that comes from the Microsoft Security Response Center, and it's that 99% of the time, when a computer is compromised, a patch was available, but it wasn't installed. That tells us two really interesting things. First, if we emphasize cyber hygiene, we take a lot of issues off the table. Second, when we're thinking about actual information sharing, the thing that makes a difference, we're only talking about 1% of the issues. It's the net new thing that nobody knows. That's hard. It's hard for companies, it's hard for governments to lean into that space. With the collection of vulnerabilities that we see going on in China as a national policy, it tells us how important that 1%, those new issues truly are. So as we think about critical infrastructure protection and information sharing, the ability for governments to be able to share new information so that those of us who have products and services out in the ecosystem can then go write the protections and write the mitigations and protect people, that is the most important thing that we can do. And so that's a vulnerability equities conversation. It's a prioritization conversation, and it's an ongoing challenge. So those are my top two.
Thank you, Cristin. We probably only have time for one question, and Professor Wu actually already standing on the
this Guo Wu is a TWIGF chair. Actually, I think thank you very much for all your presentation. It's very exciting and also, very interesting to many of them. But I have a couple of the comments, also the questions. I saw the Kenny Huang make a presentation using the Wall Street Journal and other the national, the international media, and talking about the submarine cable or ocean cable, which is of course is very important and critical for the Taiwan as an island connecting to the outside world. But I was thinking about a couple of things. First of all, those of the submarine cable or ocean cable actually is not secret, because you can go to the website to see which cable connecting to where. Actually, almost you can count one by one. It's clear. So I don't think there is a secret. Second of all, I agree, Kenny, you are talking about there's a wartime and peacetime. When there is a wartime, we have to think about what is the critical internet resources will be. I think the most critical is not the international connection. The most important is the domestic connections. If the domestic connection is more important, then ocean cable is important, but in a wartime, is that really the critical? The last one at the same time, if you look at all the ocean cable, submarine cable connecting to Taiwan, actually most of those property is belong to the foreign company. For example, Facebook, Google, other companies. Very few. I was a Zhonghua Telco board member before. We have maybe only 10%, even less, of the ownership. So depends on what degree of the war. For example, our enemy like China going to invade in Taiwan. Do they want to bring the degree of the war not only to Taiwan, at the same time, for example, to Japan, to Korea, to Singapore, because all those submarine cables belong to them. It's not belong to Taiwan. So it's surprising is in the wartime, what is the most critical resource we have to protect? And actually, if you want to make the international connection, I think we have other way. And we don't need so much traffic like the Google, YouTube. such of the, social media stuff. The last one, actually, I'm interesting about Cristin. You're talking about, the national, you're talking about the national resilience require the considering data store outside of country border. But it's really interesting one, I think, Cristin, you know that. The data localization is getting very popular in many states. That is kind of funny, in wartime, I agree, because like Ukraine, the cases. But the data localization gets so popular. For example, I think you know that, such as Germany. Germany have a very strict data localization in the policy and regulation. And it's not only the totalitarian, it's even the democratic country have the same problems. So how we can, in the international fora, to discuss how, if there is a resilience we want to maintain, should we begin to discuss what is the best international policy for the data localizations? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wu.
Okay, I can quickly respond regarding to the submarine situation. Actually, your comment is well received, and I think you are 100% correct, period.
Thank you. And Cristin, you want to quickly respond?
Sure, I figured that was coming my way. Yeah, it's true. Data localization has been a really intense conversation in Europe, as has the importance of sovereignty, and I get that. And that conversation is going to continue for some time. But we have new data that we did not have 6 months ago. And that's the importance of the ability to move critical data and government functions outside of the territorial borders of a country during times of crisis or stress. That is new thinking for the militaries of Europe and the world. It's new thinking for the governments of Europe and the world. And so while diplomatic time is both fast and slow, and diplomatic time is faster and slower, so I think that it will take some time for those conversations to evolve. But we cannot overlook the importance of the ability to move data and move data quickly, and the resiliency of the cloud in times of national crisis, as we're seeing in Ukraine, is unquestioned. So I think that it's just the beginning of a broader conversation about localization and potentially regionalization for spheres of influence and trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Cristin. I think we are already out of time. I'm not sure.
We have time for one more question. We have a question from Mr. Chan Yun in Microsoft Korea.
Oh, from online.
Yes.
Yeah. Please. Can we hear you?
Hello? Pardon?
Probably we have some technical issues.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, okay. In Korea, I think we have the same situation based on our experience. For example, beginning of the 21st century, we already experienced the kind of internal riot on 2003. So all kind of DNS services was destroyed at the time. For example, I think we need cooperation with the global companies. It's very important because we have same interest on this problem. So they need and develop the resilient system for global services. So I think we couldn't solve this issue individually. We have to cooperation and utilize the framework provided by global companies, for example, global cloud computing services and that, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. We're running out of time. It's MC's fault. But I think you all agree with me that we have such a complicated issue and such a fruitful discussion. And especially one of the topic I think have been constantly been mentioned that since the cyber attack is cross-border, so we really need this kind of cross-border collaboration between different countries and different within our region. So let's give a round of applause for all our 4 experts for today's great discussion, and really look forward to we have a continue this kind of cross-border discussion and the information sharing. Thank you all. Thank you, Cristin, for staying late.
Thank you, Mr. Shi and
Thank you,
panelists.
everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Shi and panelists, for a very thought-provoking discussion. We touched the multidimensional aspects of modern warfare. It's not just between nation states anymore. We also touched the role of corporations in what was previously only a matter of nation states. And we'll now take a short break. We will come back here in 15 minutes. There are refreshments outside. Thank you all and see you soon.